Hi, this is Tom Needham. Today on Sounds, we're diving into the haunting and deeply philosophical new documentary, Trinity, a film by Martina and Anthony Audi. The documentary explores the aftermath of the Manhattan Project, the voices of those affected, and the chilling contradictions of the nuclear age. With stunning imagery, first person accounts, and a stark contrast between government narratives and lived realities, Trinity is more than a documentary. It's a meditation on power, secrecy, and survival. I'd like to thank the two of you for joining us on the program, Martina and Anthony.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of course.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is a very powerful film. Tell me a little bit about how the two of you came to work together on this film.
Yeah, absolutely. So we live in the Southwest in Arizona, and we're actually married. And so we're both artists in different ways. I'm a musician. Anthony is a writer, and also a painter. And we had been thinking about trying to film something out here, and we were always fascinated by the role of, nuclear development and tests in the Southwest, and the Trinity site where they exploded the first bomb is not that far from us. So we were able to go on one of the 2 days a year that they open it to the public. And we just thought, why don't we go with a camera and see what happens? And it kind of came together. We weren't planning to make a movie. We were planning to see, have something come together, maybe explore the area, do a video. And one thing led to another. And it was kind of an extremely serendipitous chain of events where we met uh, protesters outside of the site who led us to other witnesses. And we were definitely interested in speaking to witnesses to that first ever nuclear explosion. And then we were able to meet them, and it just became a movie kind of in a very lucky way.
You mentioned that you went there on the day when it's opened. Why is it open so infrequently?
Because as I understanding, it's an active military base, and most of the year it's off limits to the public. But they do have 2 times a year where they have this open house, where people travel actually from all over the world to come see this site. They um, built a monument there to commemorate the explosion.
You mentioned there were
Um,
protesters. Can you tell me a little bit about the group that comes out? And I assume it's annually to protest.
I think so. Yeah, they've been protesting kind of outside the main entrance that you have to drive through to go in for many years now, and it's pretty striking. You can't miss them on your way in, and it's a real contrast between the stories that they're trying to shine a light on outside the gates of this military site, and then the kind of story being told when you go inside, which is a bit triumphant in certain ways, uncanny, uncomfortable. I mean, they're serving hamburgers,
Hmm.
selling T-shirts, things like that, on a site that marks the birth of something pretty terrifying.
Can you tell me a little bit about like what the traditional story is that they're telling between selling hamburgers?
I mean, it's the to a large extent the story that many of us grew up kind of hearing about the birth of the nuclear age. That these great minds got together and in the triumph of science and human ingenuity, constructed this fearsome technology, this new kind of weapon, which then as the story goes, was a necessary weapon to use in order to end the Second World War. And so that's kind of the general story. And the other side of it, which we explore quite a bit, is this idea that the test happened in an area which was uninhabited. And of course, that's that's not the case, especially when you consider the great distances that fallout can travel.
So in this movie, the two of you do some research, and you speak to people who know this other version of the story, and you discover that there are many people who claim that they were impacted, their health was impacted by what was going on there. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about what you learned?
Well, yeah. I mean, we didn't discover anything. It was they're out there, the protesters are there for every single time there's um an open house at the site. They're there telling their stories and they want people to hear their stories. So we went there already knowing and being in touch with one of those people who organizes these protests, who's this wonderful individual. But we wanted to go beyond that particular Trinity test story as well. So we ended up talking to the protesters outside the site and then traveling to Navajo Nation a bit further north uh, in New Mexico and talking to uranium miners there whose families and themselves were involved in actually mining the uranium that was used in many further nuclear tests. I mean, that first bomb used plutonium, but other bombs later used uranium. And we also wanted to talk about Japan and see how these three kind of stories come together. What's the connection between these different people who experience the nuclear age very close at the heart of that, at the heart of it, whether they're victims or mining the material. It was an interesting way to try to bring them together by actually speaking with regular people.
And what did you learn from regular people that's missing from the official story?
We learned a lot of different things. We learned about the secrecy of how the first test was conducted. Of course, we know that it was conducted in secret because of World War II and the Manhattan Project. But we didn't know quite how secret it was to the people who lived there, even after the war was over and people knew about nuclear weapons. Many of the people we spoke to, they didn't even know they were exposed to radiation as adults. So it was shocking to hear their firsthand experiences and how they actually had to try to uncover this information out for themselves, the effects of radiation, whether they were exposed, how long the effects of fallout lasts, how, they're transmitted through their genetics. They had to find all of that out for themselves. The government never came to tell them this or warn them about the effects or apologize or any of that.
In fact, quite the opposite. They were told that they were given a cover story that it was, an ammunition dump explosion, and they were told to carry on with their lives, keep drinking the water, keep eating the food, as though nothing had happened. The same way the uranium workers in Navajo Nation were told that it was safe to be around the mines. They weren't really given safety warnings, and they only found out because of the catastrophic consequences for them and for their families.
It's interesting. I don't know if the two of you have followed the story at all, but I was watching a report the other day, sort of like a follow up story on the people of Palestine, where there was a train derailment a while back, and there were all kinds of dangerous chemicals and toxic materials on that train, and the people living there were very nervous that it wasn't potentially safe for them to move back into their homes in the immediate area. And I have no idea whether it's safe or not, but they all claim to feel now that they were told by the government that it is safe, but they're not certain. And some of them are claiming that they're getting sick. Again, I don't know what the real facts are, but when I was watching your movie, I was thinking of them because you learn from your film that they could do something like this testing and not even warn the people in the immediate area or care for the ones who claim that they were hurt later on, according to some of the people's stories in the movie. It's really quite shocking.
It definitely is very shocking and unfortunately resonates in many ways. I mean, you just mentioned one example. Certainly, we saw what happened in Flint, Michigan with the water supply
Yeah,
in
yeah.
that city and the lies that they were told about it. And so it's yeah, and one of the takeaways, unfortunately, is people often have to become their own advocates in this situation. I mean, even very accomplished and serious historians who've written about the birth of the nuclear age, about the Trinity test, kind of have tended to completely overlook this side of the story because it doesn't get narrated and the narrations build on themselves and the stories build on themselves and whatever doesn't get told gets lost. So, I mean, in a sense, hopefully that's an inspiring side to this story, which is, seeing people advocate for themselves and take it upon themselves to let the world know about a history that's been kind of systematically covered up.
In recent Hollywood history, there was the film Oppenheimer that received a lot of attention and had a lot of awards. I was curious your take on that film because that sort of is a movie that a lot of people have seen that they're probably influenced by the way the story was told in that movie.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because we filmed Trinity in 2021, so before Oppenheimer in October 2021, and Oppenheimer came out in July 2022. So yeah, we were familiar with these stories by the time we saw Oppenheimer. And it didn't prevent me from enjoying the movie. I certainly love, the way the film was constructed. I liked the fragmentary approach to the storytelling and the suspense and also the historical aspects of that movie. I enjoyed the acting. I definitely enjoyed a lot about that movie, and also especially that ending where you see how Oppenheimer is haunted by the what he built, the monster that he created, that he helped create. So I think it had a different kind of, obviously a different intention. The subject was different. It was Oppenheimer and not the entire situation. But of course, it's a shame that it didn't go into more of what happened in Japan afterwards and what happened to the people in New Mexico. So I definitely think that at least the filmmakers could have said something about what happened, because I'm sure they became aware of it as they were filming that movie. Anthony, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a shame given it's probably the kind of movie people will still be watching for a very long time, and to a large extent, one that will kind of encapsulate that history. It's a shame that they overlook the people who were in the vicinity of that very first bomb, um, especially since so much of the movie takes place in New Mexico.
Hmm.
But at the same time, unfortunately that's a reflecting a shortcoming that exists kind of across the board among many Cold War historians. Um, or it's certainly the kind of official big histories that reach wide readerships, wide audiences.
Hmm.
One of the things I was wondering about is there was a time when there was a real fear of nuclear war in this country, and people understood the perilous times that we lived in, the fact that all these nuclear weapons exist, and there were. I know you mentioned there were protesters um, that you came across there, but in a larger sense, I've noticed that this change in the country, and I know there are still people who are concerned, but it seems like there's a lot less. And I was really kind of shocked in recent times how A lot of people that I thought in the past maybe would have been people who would be like more anti-war or protesting war were really just all gung ho about some of the recent wars in Ukraine. Um, not that not that I can't understand why people are sympathetic to the suffering of the Ukrainians, but just the mere fact that the possibility that America could be getting into some serious conflict with Russia, you would think it would bring out all of the people that are fearful of nuclear war, where I feel like instead that was just being downplayed and
Hmm.
getting very little discussion. No matter what side you're on in the war or whatever your thoughts are about it, you would think minimally people would be super nervous about the potential that we're stirring things up with Russia and the US is a nuclear power and they're a nuclear power. It sounds pretty dangerous. But yet there was very little talk about that. Do you have any thoughts as to why?
Um, I mean, it's something I've definitely also noticed, and it's probably, you know, the generalized downplaying of the danger of these weapons is probably a large part of what got us interested in this topic and made us want to go see where it all began. But there was a book a few years ago by Daniel Ellsberg called The Doomsday Machine.
Yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with that.
And that always stuck with me because he talks about, you know, and he's speaking from the perspective of someone who was involved in nuclear war planning and nuclear strategy within the military. And he talks about how the nuclear war plans essentially trigger a process that almost inevitably leads to nuclear winter. So what we're talking about here isn't just a big weapon or a particularly damaging war, but potentially the extinction of all life, or at least all life as we know it. And when you consider the kind of magnitude of that, it feels like we're miscalculating the probabilities when we talk about the risks involved with these things. And hopefully, the stories in Trinity can add more dimensions to that also because you know here we can see from just one bomb the catastrophic effects not just for people who lived through it themselves but for their children and grandchildren and sadly that will continue because these are genetic consequences. So on every level, it seems baffling that nuclear disarmament isn't a bigger issue in our time. Hopefully that will change.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I would say that it's there's part of this official kind of myth making about the nuclear industry and you know, we see in our movie how it's not a clean industry, you know. I'm I we don't touch on nuclear energy or anything like that, and that's not the intention in this movie, and I don't have an official opinion on that, but we see that the actual, the extraction of the uranium is also extremely dangerous and has left the Navajo landscape there completely poisoned. You know, they can't use the waterways, they can't grow food on that land. All of those mines have not been remediated. And it's just another part of how we're not thinking of the consequences of building these bombs and using these technologies, that they're not just contained in these bombs, that once they get used, they have dramatic, horrible effects for people for, I mean, time spans that we can't fathom. So it's definitely something that I hope people start thinking about more. And as this movie, you know, as we were seeing in our experience making this documentary, it's the people on the ground that are have to advocate for themselves because um, certainly the military industrial complex isn't going to do that and isn't going to admit the harm that these technologies do. So
Yeah, well, your film certainly does a good job of sharing that information, and it does it in a very creative way. I was wondering if you could talk about Trinity in terms of some of the choices you made as a filmmaker. You cut back and forth in a very creative manner between testimonials from people telling their stories to going back to archive footage, sometimes different footage from that original era. And then there's really wild music in this film. We play a lot of film soundtrack music on this program, and I was wondering if you could tell me about the music that you used in the film too, because I loved it.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, one of the things that we thought was fun and that we wanted to definitely do, was we were thinking, I mean, I think a lot of documentaries end up talking to experts and authoritative figures, and that's something that we felt strongly we didn't want to do. We wanted to talk to regular people, and that's, hearing their stories and they would just have the most extremely interesting experiences and ways of telling their stories. And then, in terms of the way we put it together, uh, we were wanted to build the story, put together, and evoke kind of the mystery of that actual time. There was so much silence around this bomb and so much mystery around the building of it, that in the way that the people experienced it themselves, discovering what had happened there and what happened to their families was a kind of like unveiling, was like a detective story for them. So we wanted to have kind of that feeling, evoke that feeling through the way we build the story. So hopefully that comes through. And then the eeriness of that place and of that history, we felt like is a little bit difficult for words or even footage to just show on its own. So we did bring a camcorder with us, and when we went, actually, that's part of why um, it has these sequences, camcorder sequences. When we went to the Trinity site, for example, we filmed with a camcorder, and it's just you have a different kind of view through that camera than you do through one that is much more, heavy and carrying it around. So you're actually able to visualize things. And the music, the music came from both of us. I did one of the songs that's at the end of the movie, and then the rest of the music is actually Anthony. Maybe Anthony, you could talk a little bit about it.
Um, yeah, to be honest, those were, I mean, like many things with this project, it was kind of a lucky accident because I happened to have, a few recordings that I had done once, just recording something on my cell phone, playing a synthesizer, and the music kind of seemed to work for what we were going for the atmosphere we were trying to create. And so we kind of didn't question it. We just went with it. But that's how the whole project felt from our perspective. The pieces fell into place very, very naturally. So we were lucky in that way. And in terms of the archival material, it just felt like that would be the most impactful way to kind of both corroborate the stories that you're hearing
ha- has this
through
music
official sources.
has your
Sorry?
music been used in other movies before?
No, no,
No.
never. I mean, I'm not really a musician per se, so
I just
this.
I just really enjoyed it, and it's I think it's one of the most distinguishing parts of the movie, is that music. I don't know if you're planning on releasing it or if it's already available on Spotify or anything, but I would consider that. I think our listeners would really like to hear more of that soundtrack. Um, one of the most powerful things in this film, though, besides the music and everything else, um, is how you just clearly make the argument, which you mentioned earlier, that it wasn't necessarily true, as it's often told to us, that America needed to drop these atomic weapons on Japan. I mean, people disagree about that, but you have footage in this film, historical footage, and you put words on the screen to kind of really emphasize the point. Um, what did you learn about this argument that maybe it wasn't necessary, or it wasn't necessary for America to do that?
Well, I mean, this is a topic I've certainly been interested in for a long time. There's a writer, Gar Alperowitz, who wrote a book called, I believe, The Decision to Drop the Bomb, something like that. And he goes into all the evidence in great detail to make the case that it really wasn't necessary. And one of the things that was most striking about that case is the fact that, you know, this isn't just coming from anti-war progressive people like you'd expect, but it's this interpretation of that event also, to a large extent, is the one that many of the most powerful generals had. You know, people who were directly involved in major war decisions uh, in that conflict. So they are as authoritative as anyone can be. And so many of them said in very stark terms that this wasn't necessary. The war was already coming to an end. The Japanese were already kind of preparing to surrender. You know, their codes had been broken. So the Americans knew what they were saying privately, and what they were saying privately indicated that things wouldn't continue for much longer. And then the other aspect of it, which we don't touch on explicitly in the documentary, is that, you know, one could also see these bombs dropped on Japan as the start of the Cold War. And certainly it's interesting to note that the Soviet Union uh, declared war in Japan and sort of began sending soldiers there right after Hiroshima and right before Nagasaki. So it's all of it. So to a large extent, maybe that history is also the history of great powers trying to maneuver and see who can control the post war order.
Wow. Well, I want to highly recommend Trinity to our listeners. Martina, Anthony, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Where can people go online to find out where this film is streaming?
Right now, people can go to Amazon Prime and find Trinity. If they search in Amazon Prime Video, it'll come up. But since there's a lot of other movies with Trinity in the title, like Trinity and Beyond, I would recommend that viewers search Trinity and either our names or First Run Features, which is our distributor. If they search Trinity and my name, Martina, it will come up as well, more, further up on the page. And then it'll also be available. We did print some DVDs, and those DVDs are in many, hopefully more to come, but in many public libraries around the US. And it will also be on another streaming platform called Ovid, starting February 18th.
Well, that is great, and it's a film that people should see, and people will get a lot out of viewing. I want to thank the two of you for coming on Sounds, and I wish the two of you the best of luck with the movie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Talking to you.